Welcome to Unexpected Points, a surprise Friday edition here. I am Kevin Cole, the solo podcast host here. I will be taking questions in the Q&A. Maybe I should post this here to say post Q&A here. I think you guys can fire questions on YouTube and on the X. I guess I got to start calling it X now that Elon is in control of all the levers of the most powerful government in the world. So I'll call it X. Surprise edition here because number one, I kind of been wanting to do a little bit more of these where I could take some questions and things like that. Sometimes, actually quite often, maybe more often than not, you guys come up with better questions than I do when it comes to trying to figure out what to talk about and what's coming into the weekend. So again, I will take those. Go ahead and start to put those into the comments if you want. And better yet, I wanted to discuss the game last night with a heavy focus on the decision-making here. So that's going to be the talk of the town. Probably has already been litigated and relitigated and litigated squared already. Dan Campbell's decisions last night, going for it 5 times, completing 4 of those 5 tries, gaining around 7.5 points of EPA via those decisions. So, hey, that's the game right there. Gaining at least about 17% in total win probability. Now, sometimes adding win probability from one situation and then saying win probability added in another situation and bringing them all together. So I'm saying just the decisions in and of themselves, according to the model, says it's around 17% win probability gain in total. Like I said, you can't quite do that. And that's with the fact that the models are wrong, in my opinion, about the last play. And we'll talk about that, the last 4th down try, which I think was correct to go for it, whereas the models didn't go for it. I'm going to kind of painstakingly, in a very nerd, autistic way, go through the modeling process and how we can decipher, decode these things, how you have to think about end of game situations versus middle of game situations, all that sort of stuff. So we gained at least 17%. I think it's probably more in the 20% range of how much he gained if you're going to aggregate all the win probability gained on those decisions versus the Packers, who could have gone for it, at least got marginal gains a few different times and didn't, and maybe lost somewhere in the 6 to 7% range in win probability. So a huge factor there. So we'll discuss all that. And then again, like I said, I'll get to questions if people have any of them. So I want to start with this final decision. Start at the end. And what we should talk about is what the bot said on this one. Let me go ahead and make sure the bot's in the right spot. Got the bot spot here. Okay. Sorry, I'm just rearranging some of my tabs here so I can make sure I get the right tab. Okay. So I'm going to bring it up here. What was probably shared a bunch of times last night, the Ben Baldwin bot here, and its recommendation at the end of the game. Okay. So as you see, it has 31, 31. It has the different parameters put in here, right? It's 43 seconds remaining, 4th and 1 at the Green Bay 21-yard line. The recommendation, according to the bot, and I think this is when it gets confusing. This is analytics. The quote-unquote analytics are confusing some people here on what's correct or not, because I think the ESPN model also had this as being for field goals. But according to the Ben Baldwin bot here, it is a strong recommendation for a field goal attempt, 2.9% win probability gain if you decide to kick the field goal instead. Of course, the actual play was David Montgomery, 7-yard gain, blah, blah, blah. So let's dig into the decision here. And this is how you have to think about it. Is when you're taking a cursory look at these things, all these decisions really are, all these models really are, is a simple formula. And the parameters of the simple formula are right here for you, displayed finely by Ben Baldwin here in his bot, which is you have a assumed success rate under the two different scenarios that we're weighing against each other here. We're not weighing the punt scenario, right? So we have this success rate. Here it says 91% field goal, 74% going for it. And then we have the win probabilities if you fail or if you succeed doing either one of these two things. That's all you need, because you just multiply, the succeed times the success rate, the win probability if you succeed times the success rate, plus the win probability if you fail times 1 minus the success rate, and boom, you have the overall win percentage. That's how you get the number. Simple math there. Not anything complex. The complexity comes into determining the win probabilities if you fail or succeed underneath these different scenarios. And the reason why this is incorrect, in my opinion, and this is not disputing these models and saying they're always incorrect or we should be very skeptical of models always, is because the way the models work is you're aggregating tons of data from tons of different contextual situations. And when it comes to decisions that are not right at the end of the game like this, when it comes to decisions that do not have a really definitive scenario laid out if you convert, right? Like in this game, if you can convert, there's no timeouts. You can just kneel it and kick the last second field goal. The problem is you're pulling in, because in order to make these models robust, these models are not saying, let's look at this exact scenario, play out exact game theory type of situations, and then roll it all back up into the model. No, it's pulling data from a bunch of different similar type scenarios, pulling what the win probabilities were in these similar types of scenarios, weighting it more or less depending upon the specifics of this scenario, wrapping that all together, and then coming up with the number. That works pretty well, or it's the best way we can do it, I should say, if we're further into the game. If we have games where there's multiple possessions that can still be affected, if there's even 5 minutes left to go versus 43 seconds left to go, those types of situations, that's a good thing that the model is estimating based upon all of these different scenarios, because there can almost be an infinite number of ways the game can play out, especially if we start getting back to decisions that are made in the first quarter or second quarter or third quarter, where there are 3, 4, 5, 6, 10 different possessions still available to teams on both sides. How you make a decision is really, really hard. And that is the strength of these models, right? Is that you can't even do a simple calculation on a spreadsheet or in your head or something like that to figure out the post-play win probabilities in failures or succeeding. Extremely difficult to do that. And that's why the models are great for helping us figure these things out and figure out situations where we kind of have no idea but vibes at all on what we should be doing or not. Now, the reason that the model failed in this situation is for the same reason that it's really good in those other situations, which is this situation, you can kind of toss the model out the window a little bit. It's almost better to build your own little spreadsheet, use realistic assumptions on those spreadsheets. You could come up with a more informed calculation for whether you should go for it or not than the model does. And let me point out one number here. Again, this is what I would do in these situations when we're near the end of games and you can kind of get an idea for what these numbers should be. Take a look at what they're assuming the success percentage is, the success rate is for these different types of plays. Take a look at what the win probabilities are post-play, fail or succeed on here, and say, does it make sense to me? And there's a few things that don't make sense in this model. And again, it's not a failure of the model. It's just you shouldn't be using this type of model in this type of situation. There's better ways of doing it. You could just write these things out on a spreadsheet, essentially. And I'll show you how I did that too, but I didn't label anything. It's kind of messy, so I don't want to get into it too much. But let's just go through the assumptions here. So again, 91% chance of making a field goal, 74% chance of making it if you go for it. We could probably go a little bit higher on the field goal attempt success rate. It's in a dome. It's all those things, but whatever. It's fine. It's fine at 91%. Being there at the 21-yard line, you snap it back 8 yards. It's a 39-yard kick. Whatever. It's fine. Go for it. 74%. Some people might think that 74% is high. It probably would be high if it was a full 1 yard, or if it was like more like 1.5 yard. Those all get aggregated up into being a 4th and 1 attempt. This was 4th and inches. This is a pretty good running team, although I think those factors are kind of overweighted, right? Like the base rate sort of things. The base rate for 4th and inches is probably around 75%. So if anything, it could actually be a little bit higher than that. So I think those numbers are good. And there's no reason for the model to be that off on these numbers. Now, where the model starts to fall apart for me, one number in particular illustrates to you that the model is wrong. And that is, it says, if you convert the 4th and 1, you have an 89% chance to win. If you convert the 4th and 1, only an 89% chance to win. How do we know this is 100% wrong? Well, I think by our intuition, we might think it's a 100% chance to win if you convert. It's not, but it's close. But a real easy way to point out the fact that the model is wrong is, listen, the model's telling you you have a 91% chance of making a field goal, right? And if you make a field goal, you win, right? That's the only factor. The factor is you still could miss the field goal after converting and then have to go to overtime. So it's already telling you you should have at least a 91% chance of making the field goal, because if you convert, you're getting closer to the end zone. So the field goal should become easier. So if you should have at least a 91% chance of making the field goal, and you're able in this scenario to get the first down, run down the clock to nothing, and then kick, your win probability has to be higher than 91%, because there's the win probability that you make the field goal and win, which is probably, again, higher than 91%. It's probably 92, 93%, 94%, assuming you gain some yards. And then there's also still the chance to win in overtime. If you miss the field goal, you go to overtime. And if you're the Lions, you are a 3-point favorite, I think, 3.5-point favorite going into the game. So that means you're going to win 55, 60% of the time in overtime. So even if you miss the field goal, you get a little tiny bit of juice there on the win probability. It probably should bring you up to about 96%. I think is the correct amount. And my estimation of saying 96% if you succeed on that 4th down versus 89% in this model, my number is more correct than that number is, because my number is based on the exact scenario, playing it out, not trying to use a quote unquote black box model to figure that out, which is aggregating a bunch of different situations together. I'm using the exact scenario. It should be more like 96%. That in and of itself flips the model to being go for it versus kicking a field goal. So if you just change that one assumption, it flips it to being slightly go for it versus a field goal. So everyone's sharing all of these things saying, oh, it was a bad decision because of what the model's saying. No. I am 100% certain the win percentage, if you succeed, is wrong on this model, and it should be higher. Not because the model is not appropriate for the situation. The model is fantastic for situations where it has to posit, hundreds or thousands of ways that, or 50 or 15 different ways a game can play out. This is it's only going to play out one way. Okay. I guess you could fumble a snap or something like that. But okay, again, these are fractional things that don't really fall into play. It's only going to play out one way. You go forward, you kneel it, or you run out the clock, you kick the field goal, you make it, or you miss it. And we can very easily determine how often you make it, how often you miss it. We can very easily determine how often you should win, a win probability you should win in overtime. We can estimate those things. And the number is higher, more like 96%, not 89% in this model. And again, that in and of itself shifts the model to go for it. The other thing that I believe is incorrect in this model that you can back out, that is not explicitly told to you here. It's not explicit. It is an assumption that you can figure out by looking at the numbers, is how often, if you fail and you give the ball to the Packers, let's say with 40 seconds because there's 43 seconds remaining. You give the ball to the Packers. Let's say either you give it to them at the 21-yard line or 22-yard line with 40 seconds remaining and no timeouts for the Packers, or you kick the field goal and you make it, and then you kick off, and they probably start with the ball more around the 28, 30-yard line. So in better field position for the Packers with a little bit less time on the clock. Let's say 35 seconds instead of 40 seconds, right? But those two scenarios are close enough that we can kind of group them together. It's basically what probability do the Packers have of scoring a tying or also a winning like field goal in some circumstances, right? If you miss the field goal attempt. But it's more like figuring out that tying field goal, how often they can do that. So tying field goal, if you kick the field goal and make it, winning field goal if you don't convert. How often does that happen? The implicit, if you work through the numbers in this model, you can figure out that built into it is around a 20% chance that happens, roughly, according to this model. So only a 1 out of 5, maybe 1 out of 4, it's somewhere between those two, chance that the Packers can get a field goal with 40 or 35 seconds left to go. I don't know. That seems low to me. And again, it's hard to figure out what's being built into this model, but I think the Packers in this situation, in a dome, being able to throw the ball down the field, kickers being able to make these fucking ridiculous kicks this year from really far away, especially in domes. Kickers have kind of gone next level now for how much they can make these kicks, where I don't know how high it is. I don't think it's 50% chance that they make the field goal, because remember, it's not just getting into field goal range, it's making the field goal. But it's probably well above the 25-ish percent, 20 to 25% that's being built into this model. Well above that amount. So that's wrong too, from my opinion. I mean, if you look at it here, it says if you fail going for it, you still have a 53% chance of winning, according to this model. So that means, how do you win? You either, there's two different ways you can win, right? If you fail going for it. Either the Packers, well, I guess there's only really one way you can win. They don't make the field goal and then you win in overtime, right? If you can still win this game if you fail in the go for it attempt. So if your chance of winning in overtime is, I don't know, let's say it's as high as 60 or 65%, it's saying that they're only going to get the field goal. The other circumstance, maybe 20% of the time. I don't know. That seems way too low to me. Again, I think they're aggregating a bunch of different scenarios here where maybe on the margins, if the Packers only had 20 seconds versus 35 or 40, if it wasn't as good of an offense, if it wasn't in a dome, if it wasn't all those sorts of things, maybe 20-ish percent or a little bit less than 20% would be appropriate, but I don't think it's ever really appropriate. They can use all 4 downs if you need to. They can spike the ball to use all 4 downs if you make it. I don't know. It's really a hard one. It's really a hard one, but I think I'm fairly confident it's higher than a 20-25% chance that's built into this model. So that, again, skews it towards going for it. So all the people you see saying, Campbell obviously made the wrong decision going for it. Obviously, it was a bad call, but it paid off because he was being aggressive. I think they're wrong. I think it's fairly certain it was, number one, the right call. And even if you adjust the assumptions slightly so that it wasn't the right call, it's well within the margin of error to say it's fine to go for it, knowing all we know about how tired that Packers defense would have been vis-a-vis how many plays you would run as the Lions, how good you are running the ball, all those sorts of things. I mean, those are minor things that shouldn't come into play that much. But again, the odds really were leaning towards the Lions going for it. So the criticism of Campbell, there should be no criticism of Campbell on this one. There should be no, imagine what the criticism would have been if he didn't make it, right? If we would have had these models out here saying he made the wrong decision and he didn't make it, they would have been wrong in saying he made the wrong decision. And people have been piling on even more. It would have been extra, extra wrong. So Good move by Campbell on this one. I am not, I'm behind him 100% in doing this. And larger aspect for the whole game was that by going for it over and over and over again, he needed a type of game where you're going to make it 4 out of 5 times. Now, you didn't make it every time, right? You don't go for it on fourth down because you know you're going to make it 100% of the time. And if you don't make it, it was the wrong decision. If you do make it, it was the right decision. In fact, the more chances you take at going for it, right? The more you're increasing your, not only your default win probability, but you're actually lowering the variance because you start to aggregate all these plays together. I mean, if you could go for it 1,000 times during a game, it would be an easy decision to say, let's go for it every single time because you make it sometimes, you don't make it other times. And eventually it ends up being, if it's a plus EV decision, you're more and more certain you're going to gain some of that plus EV at the end. So by doing it 5 times in this game, it leveraged that. It came up with that number, and it was very, very, very profitable for Campbell. He should be getting a lot of praise here, a lot of praise, which is kind of funny about Dan Campbell because it reminded me when Eric Bieniemy was fired the other day. It reminded me, and I kind of, or whatever the actual situation was with what happened with him at UCLA. It reminded me of how Dan Campbell became the poster child, which I contributed a little bit because I clipped his whole thing of eating kneecaps. I did clip it and send it out there. Apologies to Dan Campbell. Apologies, Lions fans. But I remember he became the poster child for undeserving head coaches when Eric Bieniemy was not getting a head coach job. They're like, we're hiring Dan Campbell. Listen to this buffoon. He's being hired and Eric Bieniemy is not getting a job. Now, I never got onto that train. I always figured, these are individuals. Yes, there may be a systemic issue with head coaching, hiring, but I think it's actually died down quite a bit from what it used to be. A lot of the numbers that are being quoted in the studies and other things, I think, are from the past as opposed to the present. And I just didn't see any reason. And I also heard some things through the rumor mill about how, Bieniemy really wasn't interviewing very well, and maybe had some issues that were going into it. So, I never got onto that, but it was interesting that Campbell got thrown in as being the buffoon, kneecap biting head coach. He also, in that offseason, said some things like not being for going for it when you're down 2 touchdowns after you score the touchdown. In that very circumstance, he wasn't for it there, although I don't think he'd actually thought about it much. He was just being posed that question on a podcast. So I kind of jumped on him, I admit, a little bit there. But I didn't know about him is, hey, Campbell's got a growth mindset. Okay. He's learning things. He's taking advantage of things. He's incorporating obviously what he's learning there. And, congrats to him on this one. Just so you know, as far as the numbers on the specific game, and you can get the rest of this information from unexpectedpoints.com on my whole write-up on the game. So Detroit was, so they won by 3. They're about 1 point better. They had slightly better success rate in this one. Performed a lot better on 3rd and 4th downs on late downs, largely because of what I said, the 7.5 gain of EPA on 4th down. A little bit more on turnovers, but not that bad. But what was interesting about this game is that if you look at pass rate versus expectation, now the versus expectation is just looking at down, distance, score differential, those sorts of things. Time left remaining, those sorts of things. It's not even factoring in that it's a dome, so you should probably be passing a little bit more often. This Lions number of only being 1.7% under expectation in this game is one of their pass happiest games of the year. The Packers were minus 6.3%. So the Packers actually were much more run heavy. I mean, they ran a lot fewer plays generally, but if you look at like the total plays for Love and for Jared Goff in this game, Jared Goff 48 dropbacks, Jordan Love only 27. So the Lions actually leaned into the pass quite a bit here. I mean, they were not good running the ball. Only 16th, they were negative 0.29 EPA running the ball. They had a 4th down failure by Jahmyr Gibbs, and he also didn't do well in a lot of his different carries. So the fact that they leaned into the pass, they were much more successful passing, also helped them win this. So they were aggressive passing, aggressive 4th downs. Those two things together got them here. And if you go through the write-up, you'll see that I explained it a little bit more. It has the top plays. And the interesting thing about Jordan Love is he actually outperformed Goff quite a bit in this game in EPA per play, but there was a post-catch fumble that was, let me see, the sixth most impactful play of the game. It lost about 3.6 expected points. So that does not ding Jordan Love. 0.42 EPA per play. And when it comes to Love, Packers fans, yeah, you lost this one. Still going to make the playoffs. You're not going to have home field and that sort of stuff against other teams, but that's fine. Against the Lions, but that's fine. It's really hard. Each time consecutive time you play a team, it actually gets better as far as being able to beat them going forward. And you probably should be a little bit happy on this one because Jordan Love is my poster boy. When it comes to adjusted efficiency right now, he is up to second in the NFL behind only Lamar Jackson, above Josh Allen, getting some benefits from his efficiency there. And when it comes to my Bayesian quarterback rankings, he is up into the top 5 for these rankings because of how well he's been doing. Still below Mahomes, Allen, Purdy, Jackson. I know you might be saying, how can Mahomes and Purdy be up there when they haven't been doing well this year? Well, this is like a career number. So we'll see. Maybe Mahomes will come back down to earth, but he's been so good in his career that he'll stay at the 99th percentile for these projections. But look at Love's up there, up 3 spots, leapfrogging Burrow and Herbert in this most recent week because he's second in adjusted efficiency this year, 7th last year. That's quite good numbers. And what's really interesting about Love, though, is if you look at PFF offensive grade, he's kind of in the not low 70s, but mid 70s, really in the thick of things. I mean, he's below Bo Nix right now. He's below CJ Stroud. He's below Trevor Lawrence. He's below Jared Goff. He's below Baker Mayfield. Actually, I haven't checked after this last game, so maybe he's below Aaron Rodgers. The PFF grading. So, I mean, I think the truth probably lies somewhere between his second ranking in my adjusted efficiency and his 21st ranking in PFF grading, but I think it's closer to my number than PFF's number. So, shout out to me, even though everyone wants to complain and say EPA is not a player stat. It's a team stat. You shouldn't use it to evaluate players. I don't know. I feel like for quarterbacks, you make good adjustments to it. It can sometimes be a lot better than any other stat that you're coming up with. Better than quarterback rating. I would say better than QBR, but QBR is an EPA-based stat, so it's kind of all the same thing. Better than PFF grading. On a long enough timeline, for sure, I'll take the EPA over PFF because it has better properly weighting of the fact that Love avoids sacks, that Love has had some very, very, very costly drops, not just normal drops, but very, very costly drops. And that while Love has had some really ugly looking interceptions and turnover worthy plays, if it's third down and you make an ugly interception, it's not as damaging as a beautiful interception, if there is such a thing, on first down. So situation matters in these things that may not come into play as much with PFF grading. All right. Just want to quickly go over some of this stuff. Let's look to see if we have any questions in the old hopper here. And I don't really have that much else to talk about. I just wanted to go over the model stuff in particular and kind of empower you guys to look at some of these assumptions going forward and figuring these things out. And again, you have to start. It's a first principles. You ever heard of first principles thinking? That's what it comes down to. Don't just have an opinion. Start from the beginning. Build up to get your opinion. Yeah, sometimes you want to take informed observers and just believe their opinion, or informed models and believe their opinion. But sometimes models can even be wrong. So you have to understand how these things are built, understand what the context is, and then form your opinion from there. Don't just have a take too quickly without thinking on your own. Okay. So a question from Brian here. What are your thoughts on the Niners trading Purdy and drafting a quarterback? What would the draft pick return and or their draft slot need to be to make it worth considering? Yeah, it's hard to say because there's not a lot of good quarterbacks in this particular draft. So it would probably vary quite a bit for me based upon knowing exactly if the draft compensation you get back can get you into position to draft a specific level of prospect. And you would only know that really on kind of like draft night-ish, unless you're going to trade them for the first pick overall. and you probably can't do that. But it also becomes a problem because a lot of teams would rather have the first round quarterback than maybe even Purdy when they haven't had Purdy in their system and he's more of an unknown going in there. So I think this might be one of these situations where there's a little bit too much friction to make a trade actually happen. Like he's worth more to the 49ers theoretically than he is to another team theoretically. And therefore, because you can be more confident in his projection going forward, not changing teams. And he's been good so far. And so another team wouldn't be willing to trade away the picks that you would need to trade away in order for him. It'd be easier in some ways to trade away a top draft pick who maybe had underperformed slightly, I think, in some circumstances, than a 7th round draft pick who would vastly overperform. So I guess I just don't see it happening. But if you could get a couple of first round picks for him and you figure out you can package some way to get a quarterback, or you're okay getting a, I don't know, Sam Darnold type of backup or someone like that to come in, yeah, I would entertain it. Why not? We can entertain it. Here's an interesting one where it's talking about just more commentary on my stuff with Dan Campbell. He says, I just think job interviews in general are a dumb and terrible measure of how good someone will actually be as a head coach. Yeah, I agree there. Actually, it's not just that like Bieniemy interviewed well. I guess maybe some of the references and other stuff wouldn't have been that great. So I think it really comes down to references over interviews, right? How does someone actually act and conduct themselves versus how they theoretically act and conduct themselves? Very important. Also, when it comes to interviewing, what teams will never do, but this is something that they've done a lot of testing on this, is the people who are interviewing, people should interview someone and write down their answers, write down their feedback, and then someone else should make the decision who wasn't actually in the room, because when you're in the room, you can get influenced by body language. You can get influenced by a bunch of different things, which are important, as a leader and stuff like that, but often it can throw people off. So, and I would also say, just because coaches are agreeing to something, like the fact that they would be willing to work with, let's say a 4th down specialist, a game management specialist, you got to see that in their past. Again, references over interviews. See that in their past that they've been willing to do that, and then be more confident in it. That says, how would you structure a head coach job interview? Well, that's part of it. I think it's like you're laying the work beforehand with the references. You're laying the work. You may be giving them a chance to explain why they might change or do things differently. Supposedly like being kind of anally retentive when it comes to detail management is really an important aspect. So you'd want to see that in references. And then, of course, like I said, structure those in the room, those out of the room making the decisions versus those in the room, a committee that's out of the room making those decisions. I know it seems really, really weird. You would want, like the owner and the GM in the room and making the decision, but it actually, that doesn't end up really working that way. This is from Fire Ice 39. How long do you think a true rebuild should take? Giants and Titans are proxies. Feels like every fan base is ready to execute their GMs and head coach 1-2 years into a rebuild. Well, I mean, how long should it take, or what's the range of outcomes? The NFL, I think, is unique versus other sports, especially something like the NBA, where I think you can rebuild in 1 year if you hit the quarterback. Now, are you going to hit the quarterback? I don't know. That's a little bit harder. It's about a 2-year rebuild if you don't hit the quarterback in year 1, or you don't take the quarterback in year 1, and then you go. But I think you can do it in 2 years. Obviously, it depends on how bad the situation is. Now, if you're coming into a Atlanta Falcons post Dimitrov type of cap situation, or maybe a Saints cap situation coming up, yeah, it's going to take a little bit longer. There's going to be digging for a year and then maybe 1 year to rebuild. But the NFL is designed, tons of player turnover, tons of emphasis on the quarterback can make that big of a difference, where you really can make leaps quickly. That's why I think also, like, people shouldn't be too wrapped up in tanking. Oh, you're setting back the team X number of years. No, you can turn things around really quickly if you need to. Again, if you give some normal expectation for missed draft picks and failed QB options, a rebuild should probably take 3 to 6 years, but everyone seems to scoff at the idea of taking more than 3. Now, yeah, I guess I would disagree. I don't think it should take that much. But you're right. If you assume failed QB options, but the problem is you kind of only get like 1 or 2 QB options, I would just be trying to figure out a way of getting multiple QB options early rather than go failure, wait for them to wash out after 3 years and then try again, that sort of thing. I would just be expediting the whole process. So I don't know. I'm kind of more of a sooner than later when it comes to these things. What do you make of the high negative correlation between raw EPA and yak adjustment to adjusted quarterback efficiency? To me, it makes yak look like a quarterback stat. It's a hard one. I mean, I give about, I think it's like 50-50 credit as far as quarterback and kind of whatever exogenous forces you want to say, scheme, receiver, whatever, the credit for the yak over expectation. And it's not the most precise way of doing it, but I kind of look to see what the results have been in the past for guys like Purdy and Garoppolo and Mahomes and others to see whether that's fair or not. And I think it looks pretty fair to do. So I don't know. It makes a big difference, but it doesn't make a big difference. What's more interesting sometimes is the interception, fumble, recovery luck, drop luck. Those are things that really kind of get forgotten about. And those can really pile up in the AQE, the adjusted quarterback efficiency calculation. Last question in the hopper here. Tommy Versetti, would you expect a negative you would expect a negative correlation, but correlations for other adjustments are a lot smaller. Yeah. Okay, let me just, I guess it's going back to the yak thing. Yeah, it is the biggest factor that goes into it. But when you start to compile some of the other ones, like drop luck and interception luck sometimes go together. So that's something that factors in there. So yeah, I don't know. The aggregate of the others is higher than the yak, but the yak is definitely a huge mover. And let's face it, it's like if you're thinking about quarterbacks and who people discount, it is the guys who are yak merchants, and it would be like Goff this year, Tua, not Purdy this year. That's why his numbers are down so much. But those guys, Mahomes for a lot of years, but Mahomes is like had such strong efficiency that he was able to have the yak merchant stuff and still be okay after that. So you don't want to discount it too much. People were doing that with Mahomes in the past and saying, Russell Wilson's probably as good at Mahomes because Russell Wilson gains EPA via air and Mahomes does it after the catch more so. Obviously, that was a fatal mistake, making that too much of a thing. All right, everybody, I'm kind of feeling a little ill, so I'm going to lose my voice probably soon enough anyway, but I appreciate everyone tuning in for this short little thing. Hopefully you learned something about the models. Maybe I'll continue to do these on Fridays going forward to take any questions people have. Otherwise, unexpectedpoints.com. Go there, sign up, leave a review, I guess. I guess people ask for reviews in these. Leave a review if you want. Otherwise, I'll be talking at you with Hermsmeyer next Tuesday. Thanks so much.